Good morning, Nick. Nice to see you today.
Hi, Skip.
Oh,
Morning.
how are things going in Singapore?
Yeah, they seem all right. The weather's been a bit hot lately. But yeah, it's morning time for you now, right?
Yep, 8 a.m.
Right.
And I hear tell that the Singapore government has the coronavirus well under control. Is that true? You feel?
It feels that way for quite quite a while already. At least yeah, because I've been like I've been going out to town and stuff randomly for the past like 2 months or so. It seems fine. Even like at night, and the malls and restaurants and all seem normal. But yeah, but not nightlife and yeah.
Not nightlife, and people are wearing their masks, are they?
Yeah, people are wearing their masks. So actually, it looks pretty normal. In fact, just the other day, I went out with a friend for a beer.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it was at a pub, not no banging music, like not overcrowded, but it was still people having a beer in a pub.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So Ioana's here. Nice to see you, Ioan. And this timing is especially intended for you and your colleagues and for Nick, so that it's not such a weird time. Just to mention that next Saturday, the 29th of August, yeah, 6 days from now, on Sunday evening, my time, so it'll be 10 a.m. on Sunday, your time, there will be a talk by Eva Ryder about the Kabbalah and the Kabbalistic Tarot. And it's very interesting material that I've been getting into. I don't have the full detail here, but maybe I can show you one thing that we'll be talking to her about, and I'll be talking about in the coming week, because the issue is an issue of evil, actually, and how to think about it and understand it. And let's just see if I have it here. No, it's not there. Okay. I have a million files on my hard drive, so it sometimes gets overwhelming. Just a second. Fortunately, we have these search engines which do seem to. And okay, I think this is it. Okay, so here's what I'm going to give you here is a page from Robert Wang's book entitled The Kabbalistic Tarot. And it seems that there was many, at the turn of the 19th, 20th century, there were a lot of people looking into what human beings know in the world. And they, as with previous millennia, they had to work in secret, because much of what they had to say was contrary to what churches and traditional religions said. And in earlier centuries, they would have been burned at the stake. But I think I think that this is an interesting point that Wang makes. He says that he's talking about the Kabbalah, and I don't have a picture of that handy right now, but there, maybe I do. Sorry, this is a bit of a pickup game on Sunday morning because I'm not quite awake, but you can read that while I find it. I think I can find it fairly quickly. Is it here? Yeah. All right. So I'm going to stop this share for a moment, and I'm going to show you the cover of this book called The Kabbalistic Tarot. And on this cover, you see this image, this structure. And basically, this is the Kabbalah that was developed in Jewish mysticism, but which has now been articulated over 3,000 years to represent basically the universe, and also how it's a model for how life works and how the psyche works. And so if I just give you a small example here, at the top we have the crown, the kether, so-called kether, but this is the crown, and all these tubes between these balls represent paths of information. Think of it as paths of information. And they are also archetypes, and there's 22 of them. And so, for example, this one right here represents the Empress or Mother. And I'm not going to get into it in greater detail here. If you happen to be, if you're not in a country that forbids the use of YouTube, you can come back and see my Monday series on that, which I'm tomorrow going to be doing session 3 from 8 p.m. Eastern time, which is going to be 8 in the morning your time, Nick. But the interesting thing about it is these paths, which represent archetypes. And so the archetypes are not in the physical world. They're in what would be called the divine realm. And what I'm doing over the next year is I'm taking 1 week each to discuss each one of these paths. And and then the other tarot cards as well. This Kabbalistic Tarot is mainly about the major arcana, which are the archetypes. And so in this quote that I'm showing you, and I'm going to go back to the quote now, in this quote that I'm showing you, what Robert Wang is talking about is one of these paths. And so those tubes that I was showing you are paths, and they're paths through which energy passes. And so if you remember that white ball at the top, that was called the crown. And so here's what Wang is talking about. This question of evil is best approached dealing with kether, which is that white ball, because this is the sole area of the tree of life where no evil exists. It is the holy of holies, having no opposing energies within it. So we're talking about opposites here, and I'm going to be reading about opposites in a minute. So evil is unbalanced force. It is a byproduct of evolution, resulting from a stage of temporary imbalance in one sephira prior to the mitigation mitigating emergence of another. That is the Kabbalistic theory. At each point of evolution is left an extreme of specific energy. Evil is an extreme. It attempts to pull to one side, making balance impossible. Unity is the ultimate goal, and unity is the result of the balance of two opposites. For example, Gebra is dynamic strength, and its opposite, Chesed, is mercy or love. The extreme of Gebra is hideous cruelty. The extreme of Chesed is the worst kind of weakness, manifesting as bigotry and hypocrisy. Dion Fortune makes the point that there are two kinds of evil, positive and negative. Negative evil is not so much a matter of choice as unbalanced temperament, but positive evil involves willfully espousing an unbalanced force for some sort of self-gain. Okay, so that's the main point that I wanted to talk about this, because I think this emerges in our politics, for example, in the politics of the United States, for example, because our president is willfully espousing an unbalanced force for some sort of self-gain. That's what he's doing in his administration in general, and also in election 2020. And so I wanted to be sure that I shared that with my friends on the other side of the world. And for what it's worth, you don't have to say anything about it, but okay. So this is a series, and this is the 8th of our series on a very complex and profound essay by Dr. Thomas Arzt, who was my friend. He was the editor of this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. Mary Stein and Thomas Arzt, editors. And the very first essay in this book is entitled The Way of What Is to Come, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. And so it's about finding the proper balance, both in your own life psychologically and in the life of our societies. And so let's see. I won't go into it further right at this moment, because Dr. Arzt covers it quite well in his essay. And so this particular session is aimed for people who do not have English as a first language. I'm going to be speaking through each of these sentences as clearly as I can, and so that's why this is done at this time. So I'm on page 28. This is about a 25-page essay. I'm on page 28 of volume 1. There's 4 volumes to this series, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. And this is the first essay in the first volume by Thomas Arzt. So in Jung's later writings, such as Mysterium Conjunctionis and Ion, the symbol of Christ as a symbol of the self will play a significant role. Now, I struggled with this concept for probably a decade, because in chapter 5 of Ion, the name of the chapter is Christ, a symbol of the self. And I just couldn't get my mind around it, because I said to myself, are you talking about the Son of God? And so I couldn't deprogram my psyche from the way it had been programmed in my in the Christian church in my Sunday school classes, where we've all been taught certain things, and we've been taught that Christ is the Son of God. Well, yes, Christ is the Son of God, but so are we all sons and daughters of God. And so the Kabbalistic Tarot is about, in part, the people who over millennia were carrying forward what was known in reality, I suppose, and how things really work, as opposed to how some church fathers cooked up the way of looking at the world so all the money would flow to them. And so it's not too hard to see that when you let a priest or a minister or a rabbi stand between you and God, then you have to pay them for the entrance fee, and so this money flows into you. So in Western Europe, that manifested in the form of these great cathedrals, which traditionally took about 100 years to build, and the whole community really contributed to that. And these cathedrals were sort of the central place of society in those days. So when there were bad storms, people would take their cattle in the cathedral to protect them, and so all kinds of things were happening in cathedrals. There were fairs and markets and that sort of thing, in addition to the services. Nowadays, we've got it all very neat and tidy, so that you only go to church on Sunday and everybody sits in the pews quietly and doesn't interrupt the service and all that. But in Europe, in earlier days, these places were sort of the central convention hall of the community. Think of it that way. And that goes back centuries and centuries, millennia, and even in China, the inner city is a manifestation of that, and the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, which was built in the 550s, around in the 6th century. That was a manifestation of it too. And it's a quite interesting building, because the Hagia Sophia was built about 1,000 years before the Vatican was built. So our St. Peter's was built in the Vatican. And so it had a dome in it, or it has a dome in it to this day. And for 1,000 years, it had the largest dome of any building in the world. 1,000 years, until the St. Peter's was built, and you can see the manifestation of how all the money flowed to the church. Here we have all the money flowing to the financiers of today, the bankers. And so we can see it in Singapore with modern buildings. You can see it everywhere where in these modern cities we've built. The rich get richer and the poor stay the same. And so anyway, so the fundamental issue behind all of this is the union of opposites, and how can we achieve that, not only in our societies, but also in ourself. And so when he's writing here about Christ as the symbol of the self, what he means is the central part of every person's psyche, which is, which in traditional terms was referred to as God. In Jungian psychology, is referred to as the God image, or the greater personality, or something to that effect. And so Christ is a symbol of that, because he lived out his calling perfectly, except for one thing. And that one thing proved that he was a man, and therefore a God man, and not only of God. Because when Christ came on the scene in Palestine in Christ's day, he had been educated somewhere. We don't know where, actually. He disappeared from age 12 to age 30, and he was obviously educated somewhere. And I know in India there are a couple of monasteries that claim that Christ was at their monastery for years and was trained there. And there's a joke between Christians and Buddhists, which is Christ and Buddha are on a stage, and all their followers are assembled, and someone raises a hand in a Q&A session and says, "What keeps you apart? You know, what is the difference between you?" And the answer is our fans, our supporters are the things that keep us apart, because otherwise we're the same. And that's the essence of it, because all religions point back to the same ideas. And this is true in across the world in all the major religions, and the minor ones too. Okay, so I'm going to read on with Dr. Arzt here. So there's a subtitle here called The Union of Opposites. The theme of the unification of opposites is a central motif of the Red Book, and like the symbol of Christ, is further elaborated in Jung's later works. This theme deals with the recognition of the neglected and ignored aspects of the psyche, as well as with the consideration of the opposites as the missing half of wholeness. And so in China, we can see this as the yin-yang symbol. And I actually have a couple of yin-yang symbols that really tell the story. So I think I'll share them at this point because they really are opposite. So let me share this one for you. Okay, so that is a very clear example of the opposites. There is duality, but it's the unification of the duality that creates a whole universe. So also it's a circle, and therefore the mandala. And humanity has been making mandalas and creating the unity in circles for at least 50,000 years that we can point to. And just see if, and so the point is that within, let's say, masculine and feminine oppositeness within the human family, let's call this the universe, but within the human family, there's masculine and feminine, but within each of us, there's a little bit of the opposite. And then these opposites go down layers and layers. So there's many layers of the opposites. And there's one other that I can show you that's very good, that was created in the Far East. And it gives a sense of these let's see. I think this is the one. Yeah. Okay. So here's another example of that, where all of us are living in a world of many, many layers of opposites. And so in this, you can see all these different aspects of life, from cooking um, to astrology to food sources, plant and animal, all kinds of things. And there's opposites in everything. And of course, this symbol is always in motion. And in this particular image, it appears to be going in a clockwise direction. Nick, would you say that this is going clockwise, this image? As you look at it, do you see it going clockwise or counterclockwise?
I mean, just generally, it's definitely clockwise because of
Yeah. Okay. So your reaction to it, your first reaction to it, is clockwise. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
but I can go counterclockwise also. Just that I'm saying the normal tendency. Like, let's say if you look at a boat, and its weight, right?
yeah.
It will be
Right. Okay. So again, looking at this symbol, this other one, it would appear to be going counterclockwise, I think, correct?
yes, by the same
Yeah.
counter. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we see that the same way. That's encouraging. We're on the right track here. Then there's one other image that I happen to have of the yin yang symbol, which we're all familiar with, which is boy meets girl, or masculine meets feminine, and the world keeps going around, and so that's about the opposites too. And this appears not only in Christianity, but in Taoism and throughout the Middle and Far East, and so that's kind of what we're talking about here. Okay, but the idea is that the mandala is wholeness, represents wholeness, and it has done in the human species for thousands of years. I'll just share, I have this picture. In Jung's time, the oldest mandala that had been found on Earth was in Zimbabwe, but since his death, we found this one, which is in Kimberley, Australia, and it's on the wall of a cave in Kimberley, and the dating of this mandala is approximately 50,000 years ago. Now, here's a shocking fact for you. Mandalas go back way, way farther than 50,000 years. I'm going to prove that to you. And here is this one. So here's another mandala. It's a symbol of wholeness, and these mandalas were found on the floor of the sea in the Sea of Japan, right?
You do from your I was with the Orion guy, right? You had this
Yes.
a fish.
Right, and it's created by a fish, and it's created by the puffer fish. And now I'm going to quickly just show you these things so that just to set them in your mind, because some of our audience here may not have seen this sort of thing in the past. So I want to share it because it's very, very interesting. So for several years, the divers couldn't figure out how these mandalas were getting on the seafloor. And finally, they caught this fish, the puffer fish, on the making one of these things on the seafloor. And this puffer fish in Japan is the fugu fish. So this is the poisonous fish that if you go to a sushi restaurant and the sushi chef doesn't know how to cook the puffer fish, you can die, and very quickly, if you're not with someone who knows what he's doing. But what this puffer fish is doing is he's creating a mandala, because the female fish then comes along and she lays her eggs right in the center of this mandala. And somehow to this fish, this is symbolic of security and safety in a place where one can have one's babies. And so the point is that the mandalas were in living species about 200 million years ago, because one of our subscribers, Gray Yates, said that human evolution and fugu fish evolution diverged 200 million years ago. And so it's not just human that thinks that a mandala is godlike, I suppose, or something about security and wholeness. And so, all that may sound weird, but nonetheless, that's why images of mandalas, which appear in places like the rose windows of Notre Dame or Chartres Cathedral, or pretty much any major cathedral in the world has a rose window at one end of it. And so the Chinese, the Taoists, obviously understood this concept of mandala going back way before Lao Tzu. So here's what Arzt is then referring to. This theme deals with the recognition of the neglected and ignored aspects of the psyche, as well as with the consideration of the opposite as the missing half of wholeness. Now remember, Dr. Wang was talking about evil being where things are not in balance. You begin to have a presentiment of the whole when you embrace your opposite principle, since the whole belongs to both principles, which grow from one root. Sorry. The psychological formulation of the problem of opposites is regarded by Jung himself as a renewal. In this Red Book, numerous pairs of opposites are found: sense and nonsense, fullness and void, creation and destruction, love and hate, spirit and matter, insanity and sanity, above and below, order and chaos. Phases of psychic order are succeeded by phases of psychic chaos that defy any form of rationality or control, while still being in the condition sine qua non, he says, in the conditio sine qua non, in the condition of the original state, for the transformative mystery that is individuation. Now, what he's referring to here is that individuation, which is probably the fundamental idea in Jungian psychology, is where we as human beings gain wholeness in our psyche. And so that means that we are aware in our consciousness of all of the aspects in our own self, and we withdraw our projections from others. So if, for example, I think that something the President of the United States is doing is evil, that might be true, but I have to understand that that same evil is within me. In other words, if I were in his position, with all factors being the same, including my mental health and other things, I might do the same thing. Okay, if I were fighting back to stay in office right now, as our president is doing, I must accept that in his position, I might do the same thing. And if I understand that, then I understand something precious, because I understand that in order for us to be whole, we have to understand our fellow men and women, in some way. And so I can say, yes, if I were in this man's position, I might well do many of the things that he is doing. But that doesn't mean that I agree with them, only that I understand that it's human. So it's not that he's a bad man, it's that he's an imbalanced man. And so therefore, he's consciously trying to create imbalance. He's consciously trying to pull the country apart instead of allowing us to be united. And so in Dr. Wang's terminology, as we were discussing here, I'll put that back up on the screen, I guess, so that you can see that once more. Where did it go? I don't know. I had it. That's it. All right. So I'm going to put it back on the screen once more so that we understand this psychological point, which is embedded in all philosophies, and it's embedded in the Tao and Taoism and the Yin Yang symbol, and it's embedded in all of these esoteric ways of thinking about the world. For example, the Kabbalistic Tarot. And so so here's the kicker, is that positive evil involves willfully espousing an unbalanced force for some sort of self-gain. And that we can see manifest in our current president, because he's obviously trying to drive a wedge between the American people, and yet we don't. Ideally, the American people are not two different peoples. We are one people, and united we stand, right? All right. So, and individuation is recognizing that, and recognizing that once a president is elected, he is representing all the people of the country, not only those that elected him. This is a concept that the president regretfully does not understand. And at the same time, we have all these pressures, these opposites, pushing and pulling on us, as I've reflected in the various yin yang symbols. And so that's why our psyches may seem in chaos. We may be very depressed because we've got all this stuff swirling around in our head, and we don't really appreciate what it all is. We can't conceptualize it. And so if we can't conceptualize it, then we can't resolve it in our heads. But if we can pick it apart and say, okay, there's this opposite going on, that's masculine and feminine, let's say, and then there might be an opposite of spicy or sweet, for example, And each one of us is somewhere on that scale of the difference between spicy and sweet. And I had to learn many years ago that if you get a spicy food, the first instinct is to put water on it, like a fire. It's fiery. And so if you eat a pepper that's very spicy, or Thai food that's very spicy, or Korean kimchi, which is very spicy. And I've been in a few occasions where I've had spicy food that was about to blow my head off. And the absolute wrong thing to do is to put water on it, because that just makes it hotter. And the correct answer is to take some sugar and take a spoonful of sugar and put that in your mouth. And that is the opposite of the spiciness, and it will calm it right down. It's an amazing fact. And a lot of people don't know that, but that's how you, if you're eating spicy food and it's too much for you, the correct answer is to put some sugar in your mouth in one way or another. Go ahead, Nick.
There is also, I mean, this is going to sound strange, but it's true. There is also this phenomenon where you continue taking spicy food. I know that sounds strange, but how do I put this? Okay. I think what I was trying to say is that I totally agree with you about that if you take like cold water, that's actually the worst thing to do. But if it's like really bad, like let's say in Singapore we have this thing called chili padi.
Mm-hmm.
When we eat it with these fried anchovies, right? What I realized about it is that like you can get into it until you feel like you want more and more, even though it's like really spicy, and that's because there's this phenomenon of it being unbearably spicy, but yet it normalizes with more spice that you take. You get what I mean? So it's actually when you stop eating that you feel that phenomenon of ouch.
Yeah.
But
okay.
That's just
so you get into the spiciness, and then you want more and more spiciness, and then you stop.
Okay, yeah. I guess it's still when it's in the zone of being pleasant, and that's why people eat it, because it's really spicy and they can't stop eating it. But yeah, if it's painful, then like you said, sugar.
Yeah. So also we can see it in our politics, where it's pretty easy to say, okay, I'm going to, because I'm fighting for one side of the red or the blue in the United States, I'm going to really, really, really fight hard for my side. And that's really the wrong thing to do. What we really need to do is figure out how we can blend red and blue and make them purple. Now, Yuan has a couple of questions here, which are very good ones. She says, she's talking about the Kabbalah now that we were looking at earlier. And geez, I took it off my screen again, but we were talking about the Kabbalah, and she asked about how many balls and how many paths. And so what I'm going to do is put that cover of Robert Wang's book up again, and then we'll talk about that briefly. Okay, so here's the screen. All right, so here's the Kabbalah. And technically, if you're looking at a two-dimensional Kabbalah, it will look like 10 balls. Okay, so the 10, if you're looking at it in 2 dimensions, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, but it's actually not two-dimensional. And so Dr. Wang gets into many deeper layers of this, and so it's three-dimensional. But in any case, how many paths are in it are 22. I'm not sure we can see them all here, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and there's 22, 23, 24. I'm getting lost, and there's a little bit of a conflation between two-dimensional and three-dimensional. If you look at the two-dimensional Kabbalah, it's 22, and that's what is represented in the major arcana of the Tarot. And so the interesting thing for me, because I already knew that the major arcana of the Tarot are the archetypes, or are some of the major archetypes of the human psyche. And I've known that for 25 years. What I didn't know until very recently is this Kabbalah issue. And the significance of the paths. So when we're talking about these paths, we're talking about an archetype, and so that's these paths here. They're these tubes. Think of them as energies between the balls. If you think of this as a very complex molecule, perhaps, then the energy that holds the atoms of the molecule together would be the archetypal energy. And so one way to think about them from a Jungian perspective would be it's like a riverbed that has no water in it. And so the sort of the idea of mother, this one happens to be the one for the Empress, which is number 3 in the Tarot. And so think of it as this: the idea of mother is like a dry riverbed. We can all talk about mother. We all have a mother, and it's very clear who our mother is and what a mother is. But when you actually put water in that dry riverbed, that's quite different. So when one becomes a mother, actually becomes a mother, then the energy of motherhood fills that dry riverbed. And now for women, that is mother. I know it now. I mean, before I had this idea of what mother was, and girls who haven't had a child yet, you can have all the idea in the world in your own mind what motherhood might be, but when you actually are a mother, that's quite different. And I think many women will concur with that fact. At the same time, there's the famous warrior archetype, which is a typical archetype for men. And so I was a warrior, or I am in various ways, but so the idea of being a warrior is one thing, but actually having the experience of being a warrior is expressed in this self-portrait that I did about 20 years ago. And I did this from a photograph of me in Vietnam. It was taken in 1970. I did the painting.
Oh, it's really nice. Oh, sorry, it's really nice. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Tim, Nick, I didn't hear what you said.
No. Sorry, I interrupted, but I just said it's really nice. It looks really nice.
Well, but it expresses the reality of warrior, and even if you've never been a warrior, you really can't appreciate that. And the essence of it is carried right here in the white of my left eye, and you can, and maybe in the position of my lips and my teeth here is the essence of what it's like to actually be a warrior. So, lots of young men can get the idea, having seen a picture of a U.S. Marine in dress uniform, that, oh, wouldn't it be so nice if I was in a dress uniform like that? But as I have often joked, um, you know, having a dress uniform um, is like 1,000 hours in the mud for every 1 hour in dress uniform, something like that. That's the trade-off that you have to make. And so, if you ever see a soldier that's suffering from PTSD, um, that's what it's about, that it's an actual experience of it instead of the idea of it. And let's see, I think I can give you the opposite picture here if I look. Maybe not. Well, okay, I can, without showing me in uniform, I can show you this picture. Okay, which basically gets an essence. So on my 70th birthday, my daughters gave me a surprise party, and two of my daughters who live far away came to the Washington area to my other daughter's home secretly. And then on this occasion, they surprised me with presents. And this picture was taken about 5 minutes after the surprise was sprung. And so I can talk about, you see how emotional I get just talking about this. So the essence of what I'm trying to say is that I can talk about what I was feeling in the moment that they surprised me with this party on my 70th birthday. But I can in no way actually express to you how I was feeling. And so I can talk about it till I'm blue in the face, but you can sort of get the essence of my happiness here, sort of in general terms, but there's no way that you could actually experience that. And so that's sort of the idea that we're getting at here. And so when I talk about the mother in the Kabbalah, we can talk about mother until we're blue in the face. But unless you're actually a mother, you're never going to appreciate what this path means. And you're never going to appreciate it from an experiential point of view. You can intellectually understand it, but you're not going to actually know. Okay, that's the difference. And so that's the difference that Dr. Jung got in trouble with on his video, where he's asked whether he believes in God, and he says, I have no need to believe, I know. Okay, and so in his own psyche, what he meant by that was that within his own psyche, he knows God. and he knows the living God. And so that's quite different from talking about God, and especially talking about God that's outside of us. And so that's the distinction that modern science hasn't figured out yet, that you can talk about things until you're blue in the face, but until you've actually experienced it, you don't know. Okay. So here's it's a quote, a Jungian quote. Let me just double check this. Okay, so in the Red Book, Dr. Jung makes the following quote, which comes after this sentence. So I'll read the sentence before it, and this sentence ends with a colon, and then we have the quote here. Not sure. Okay, so I'm going to read this sentence, and then here's the quote that I'm going to read. And it is, phases of psychic order are succeeded by phases of psychic chaos that defy any form of rationality and control, while still being the conditio sine qua non for the transformative mystery that is individuation. So he's talking about individuation, and he's talking about the condition we all have to be in order for the mystery of individuation to happen. And in order for wholeness to be achieved, let's say, you have to have these conditions. And one of the conditions is the imbalance between the opposites. So here's what Jung said. We recognize that the world comprises reason and unreason. And we also understand that our way needs not only reason, but also unreason. But one can be certain that the greater part of the world eludes our understanding. It means we can't quite understand all these things. We must value the incomprehensible and unreasonable equally. Although they are not necessarily equal in themselves, a part of the incomprehensible, however, is only presently incomprehensible and might already concur with reason tomorrow. But as long as one does not understand it, it remains unreasonable. Insofar as the incomprehensible accords with reason, one may try to think it with success. But insofar as it is unreasonable, one needs magical practices to open it up. If one has done one's best to steer the chariot, the one then notices that a greater other is actually steering it. Then magical operation takes place. But the condition is that one totally accepts it and does not reject it in order to transfer everything to the growth of the tree. So what he's saying is that we can't really understand all the opposites that are within us. And this all points toward an idea that comes up later in Dr. Jung's writing about about bringing the opposites together and and wholeness, which represents human individuation. In other words, we have to accept that the unreasonable is also within us. And so when I think that the President of the United States shutting down the US Postal Service is unreasonable, I have to also accept that it's within me, that if I were in his position exactly, then I might do the same thing. And I have to accept that fact. So, whereas the question is, does the president understand it from my point of view, or from the point of view of people who are not getting their retirement checks. That's the question. And so when we pull from side to side in all of these opposites, we're just pulling our psyche apart, and that causes depression, and or there's too much of a clash between two. And basically there's an old English saying that says, walk a mile in another's shoes, walk a mile in their shoes. And so, it's very difficult for a man to walk a mile in the shoes of their mother, because we can't experience motherhood. And, but we need to try. I mean, wholeness requires us to try to understand that other point of view too. And keeping in mind that there's an infinite number of opposites. The yin yang symbol only represents it at one level, but as I pointed out earlier, it actually exists at many levels. I'll put that image back on the screen again, just so you can emblazon it in your mind that these opposites are operating all the way down in our psyche. And so the significant thing is the symbol. And so this is a symbol, and what we have to understand about these things is that in order to develop ourselves, our psyches, we have to go through these processes of reconciling the opposites thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of times in our lifetime. And then we become individuated, but traditionally we would say we've gained wisdom. And so the way this works is that something is a thesis, so a one, but in numerology, the one does not do anything. There's nothing happening in a one. You have to have a two. And once you have two, then you have some sets of opposites there, whatever it is. And so there's thesis, antithesis, and then what happens is that between the thesis and the antithesis, there's a synthesis. Okay, so you can think of there's a spectrum in there, and that would also be the path, the archetypal path. And so between this archetype and this archetype, there's a path, and that's a synthesis of the two opposites. Okay, so now you've got a mother and a father, and their synthesis is a child. And so now what do you have? You don't have a mother and a father and a child. You have a mother and you have a family. Okay, so that's a new one. Okay, and so now it's not mother, father, and child, first, second, and third thing. Now it's a fourth thing. It's family, and now that family is a family and a second child, and that's a thesis and an antithesis, and then that has to be synthesized down to become a bigger family. Okay, and so you can think about it that way, and this is the so-called theorem of Maria Prophetessa, who was a astrologer and alchemist in the 3rd century after Christ. And her thesis is 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, 3 becomes a 4th thing, which is 1 again. And so the simple way to think of that would be, whoever you are, man or woman, you find your opposite number man or woman or partner, because sometimes they're within the same sex, the same gender, let's say, but you find someone who fulfills you, who makes you more whole, and together you create, first a couple, and then that couple creates a child. Okay, so you create a couple. That's the synthesis of the man, the one party, party one and party two. We won't make it dependent upon gender. So party one and party two make each other more whole by a synthesis of the two, and so therefore you have what we call a couple, and that's the synthesis between the two, and then that couple becomes one again. So during courtship, you're totally paying attention to one another. Okay, and so that's when the opposites are either attracting or blowing apart. And so if you blow apart, then that guy isn't going to be your spouse or whatever it is. But if you're attracted, then the couple does some courting, and there's this very exciting time of courting. And then, so you're facing one another and you're courting, and suddenly, boom, that becomes either a couple or, it becomes a couple, and that's the synthesis. Now you have a couple, and you do more interaction if you're opposite sex, and the result of that is a child. Okay, that's the synthesis that appears in that set of opposites, and so it becomes layers upon layers upon layers in your psyche. It's very, very deep, and this is why it's impossible to help someone at a superficial level in their psyche, because there's actually thousands of layers of syntheses that have taken place in your lifetime in order for you to be who you are, and we're all different, and so that synthesis of you we call individuation. This is what he was talking about, and so then that synthesis gets integrated into the whole, and that becomes an integrated personality. Maybe we call it at a depth, someone who knows it rather than believes. I mean, you can believe that it must be amazing to be a mother. Okay, I mean, I can certainly believe that it must be amazing to be a mother, but I can never experience that. And so I can never experience what it's actually like to be a mother. But as I've shown you, you can believe that it must be amazing to be a U.S. Marine and be able to wear that fancy blue uniform and all those medals and so on. And you can believe that that's amazing, but until you've actually done your 1,000 hours in the mud for every 1 hour in blue uniform, you can't appreciate what that blue uniform means. And so, the President of the United States can believe it's amazing to be able to ride on Air Force One and have bands play Hail to the Chief all the time. And we can all believe that that must be amazing. But in order to experience what it means to be a true leader or not, one has to actually go through that experience. And if you are a leader, you're going to be revered for hundreds of years, maybe thousands, as George Washington was and is, or Abraham Lincoln is. they were true leaders. And if you don't step up to that, then you're going to be a footnote in history. And so, anyway, going on. All right. So, the basic issue, writes Shamdasani, was how the problem of the opposites could be resolved through the production of the uniting or reconciling symbol. So, let me read that again. The basic issue, writes Shamdasani, Shamdasani is the editor of the Red Book, was how the problem of the opposites could be resolved through the production of the uniting or reconciling symbol. And so, in order to solve the problem of opposites, we require a symbol that tells us what the synthesis is. So, as I was saying, man, thesis, woman, antithesis, and the uniting symbol is the child. Okay, and that production of that symbol of the uniting of man and woman. Okay, I have a symbol of a uniting here on my wrist. Okay, my wedding band. That's a symbol of my marriage to my wife, Debbie. And so it merely says to you, the audience, that I have a partner, and that I think highly enough of that partner to be married to her for now 35 years. Yesterday was the 35th anniversary of Debbie and me meeting online and later marrying. And so, by the way, here's a global challenge to everybody around the world. Debbie and I say that we are the first couple to meet online and marry. And I've never had anybody say that they met someone online before August 22nd, 1985, and then marry. And so I'll proclaim and claim at this point in time that we're the first couple to actually do that, to meet one another in an electronic format and then marry. And we met online about 10 years before the World Wide Web got started. At that time, there were just email networks that were available. And one of the early ones was called The Source, believe it or not, The Source, SOURCE, The Source. And so on that network, you could put 7 interests. And so I wanted to believe it or not, we met because of a trade fair in China. I had realized that there was going to be this trade fair in Hangzhou, China, called the International Secondhand Machinery Trade Fair. And being an entrepreneur, I said, well, all we have to do is find secondhand machinery and we can sell it to China. And so I wrote one of the first spams, believe it or not. And I decided to, on this email network, look up everybody that listed entrepreneurship as an interest. And there were 35 people on the source that had put entrepreneurship as one of their 7 choices. And so I wrote them all an email and said, hi, I'm Skip Conover. I'm going to the International Secondhand Machinery Trade Fair in Hangzhou, China, and I would like to represent, closed factories or secondhand machinery in China at this trade fair. And if any of you have any connections that would work, let me know. And I got one answer, and that one answer was from Debbie. And she was working for a company called the Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company that was closing down one of its cigarette factories in the United States. It had At that time, 1985, it had 3 cigarette factories. And one of these plants was in Petersburg, Virginia, and they were making 250 million cigarettes a day. Okay. That plant made 250 million cigarettes a day, and they were going to shut it down. And so Debbie came to me and said, well, I happen to know one. And she was working for a company that was trying to figure out what to do about the workforce. And so she wrote to me and said, I know this factory. So I said, great, I got to talk to you. So as soon as I could, I called her on the telephone, and we arranged, first of all, for me to meet the owners of the Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company in Petersburg, Virginia, which is near Washington. I was living 400 miles away at the time, and I arranged to meet them 1 week later. Okay, so the 29th of August, 1985. And so I went and met them and basically agreed with them that I could represent their machinery in Hangzhou. And it was a very interesting experience down there, because each of the machines that makes cigarettes can produce 3 million cigarettes a day, believe it or not. So anyway, I reached an agreement with them that I would represent them at this trade fair. And so then I went back to Washington after that meeting and had dinner with the woman who would become my wife. But my first meeting of her was 1 week. And my first physical meeting with her was 1 week after we met online. So that's the story of the first couple to meet online and marry. There's a lot more to that story. Archetypal things, because when I met Debbie for the first time, she was wearing this bright red dress of silk, a silk red dress, and I was decapitated. So that was the end of my first marriage and the beginning of my second, right there at that moment when I met her. But it worked out, and we're still together 35 years later. and so that's a good thing. But that's how Skip and Debbie met, because of an international trade fair in Hangzhou, China. And so, so anyway, going back, so we have the issue of the reconciling symbol. And this forms one of the central themes of Liber Novus, one of the central themes of the Red Book, which is what we're talking about, because this series is all different perspectives on the Red Book. Both poles of each pair of opposites, good and bad, spirit and matter, reason and unreason, etc., are to be acknowledged in life in order to gain a holistic worldview during the mysterious process of individuation. Okay, so we basically have been discussing that throughout this session, but you need to acknowledge the existence of the opposites in order to get a whole worldview. Okay, so he says the world is a painting of opposites. Okay, so we are the manifestation of all these opposites in so many ways. Jung's perspective here, first and foremost, draws on Heraclitus and Nicholas Cosinus. These were earlier thinkers, together with the principles of enantiodromia and the transcendent function. The concept of opposites and the unification of opposites represent the foundation of Jung's later elaborations in analytical psychology. So we have to talk about enantiodromia for a moment. Enantiodromia was an idea of Heraclitus, which says that where there are opposites, there's a tendency for them to become their opposite, okay, to cross over and become their opposite. And so if you have two different opposing forces, they will not only tend to reach a symbol in the center, but they might go right by each other and become their opposite. And so we have a very clear example of that in American politics, where Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, and the people that he was fighting against were Southern Democrats, and the Democrats had control of the American South, the electorate in the American South, for 100 years. And so it was the Republican side that was the blue forces in the American Civil War, and it was the Democratic side that was the gray forces. But over the years, they tended to cross over. And so now the party that controls the South is no longer Democrat, as it was in the time of George Wallace and Lester Maddox, two famous American bigots of the South. But today they wouldn't be Democrats, they would be Republicans. And so how does that happen? Well, let's talk about how that type of crossover could happen. It happens because when we have an election campaign like we have now, each party will put into its constituency people that believe certain things. So they're election issues. And so famous election issues here are abortion is one, gun rights is another one, and civil rights is another one. And so what the parties tend to do is put more people into their constituency until they outweigh the other side and therefore can win a presidential election. And so, you might think you're a gun rights voter, but if then you find out that, oh, by the way, the party that's supposedly supporting your gun rights issue is also the party of the big banks, which destroyed your financial security by being irresponsible and causing the Great Recession of 2008, or by not dealing with the coronavirus in 2020, then your concern for your gun rights might be outweighed by the fact that these people are irresponsible. And so you might tend to start being on the other side. And we've actually seen that in our politics in the United States very clearly, where people who have been Republicans, one famous one is John Kasich, who was the Republican governor of Ohio, but recently he was on the Democratic National Convention. Another example is the so-called Lincoln Project, which was founded by three famous Republican operatives, Steve Schmidt, George Conley, and Rick Wilson. Those three are very famous Republican operatives, but the Lincoln Project is committed to defeating Donald Trump. And so the point is that their loyalty to other aspects of the Republican platform has been outweighed by the behavior of this president to such a degree that they've decided to go over to the other side. So they have come over, at least for the purposes of this particular election, they've come over toward the Democratic side of the electorate. And so we don't know how that will finally play out until we have our election in November. But the point is that let's suppose that the Democratic side is successful and is therefore successful in getting rid of Donald Trump. What this then means is that everything will be put back in the crock pot and stirred around, and we don't know whether those Republican operatives or men, Rich Wilson and Steve Schmidt and George Conley, we don't know whether they will end up still on the Democratic side after the election, or and John Kasich, whether they will stay on the Democratic side or they will try to be still part of the Republican Party. Obviously, if the Republican Party were to lose, then the Republican Party has a lot of rethinking to do in order to figure out how to be attractive to more Americans. So they will have to start looking for new constituencies. And if they win, then it means that Donald Trump is going to get stronger and stronger and create greater and greater issues within the United States. And so the balance may tip in 2024 instead of 2020, and things might get worse than they are today. But we can be sure in the context of what I showed you earlier about evil being an imbalance of the opposites, that if Donald Trump wins, he's going to continue to pull the American people apart. And so he will be more and more demanding in that respect, which won't be very good for wholeness. It's kind of an example of how a whole country can be neurotic and where things are pulling from both sides. And the problem is that in a neurosis, there's never a cure. Okay, there's always, those sets of opposites are always there. But in working in psychotherapy, you're able to draw a fence around that set of opposites that was causing that neurosis and put it aside and say, oh yeah, that's over there. I know that that's there. But it would be like Steve Schmidt saying, drawing a circle or a fence around Donald Trump. And after Trump loses, he says, oh yeah, I know that that's there, and that's like a tumor in the Republican Party, but I'm just going to circumscribe that and put it aside in my psyche, and I'm going to go back and work for Republicans again, because in general I'm more in favor of the Republican point of view. And I'll know that I have to remember that this is a shortcoming. It's like I have to remember that I have an artificial ankle, for example, thanks to my time in the Marine Corps. And so, yes, I can dress up in my uniform, but I always have to remember that I have an artificial ankle. And so I can't really do the things I could do when I was 25. That's the sort of issue that comes up. All right, so we've talked about the opposites. So the world is a painting of opposites. And so we talked about enantiodromia. Now let's talk about the transcendent function. Okay, so the transcendent function is relates to a set of opposites, which is consciousness and unconsciousness. Okay, and so we need to become more and more conscious. And Jung tended to talk about awareness. Okay, and so instead of consciousness per se, and so the reason that I prepare these emails, or I'm sorry, these videos, is to help people become more conscious of their own psyche and to help you see some of the things that I've come to know. I mean, a lot of this stuff, if you'd asked me 30 years ago, I wouldn't have had any idea about them. And a lot of them took a long time to work out. And so, but because I have worked with them, I not only am conscious, but I can tell you how they work. And a classic example, which my followers know very well, is that my daughter, after one of my daughters, after I had separated from their mother, fell in with the fundamentalist church. And we've kept very good relations over the years, but on her 22nd birthday, I took her out for dinner, and the two of us had this lovely dinner together, just the two of us, and we had a conversation about 3 hours long, and we had been in Japan together when she was a little girl, from ages 5 to age 10, and so we had a lot of very interesting experiences to talk about. And at the end of the evening, the last thing that she said to me was, "Well, I hate to say this to you, Dad, but I think you're going to hell," quote unquote. And I was quite stunned by that statement. And I asked myself that night, and am still asking myself, who teaches a child to say such a thing to a parent? But when she said that to me, I literally dropped into hell from a psychological point of view. And it took me 10 years to work my way out. And the only way I could was through Dr. Jung's work, because he gave me an awareness, a consciousness about religion and about what the ideas of heaven and hell mean, such that I was able to understand what was going on in my own psyche and integrate that into my own psyche. And the good thing about it is that I never blamed my daughter for that. I blamed the people that would teach a child to say such a thing to a parent. And because I never blamed my daughter, I didn't fall for the devil's trick, which is the devil's trick would be for me to get furious at my daughter and sort of disconnect our relationship. And then after that is over, then I have lost my daughter, which I didn't do. And so because I never fell for the devil's trick, and I always blamed that incident on fundamentalist pastors, I didn't get angry with my daughter, and so I kept my daughter. But I could easily have lost my daughter in that moment if I had fallen for the devil's trick. But fortunately, over a 10-year period, I was able to work my way out of that particular hell. And so now, now in terms of my relationship with my daughters, it feels no different than how it might have felt if I had stayed with them during their growing up years. At least that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Okay, but so anyway, but the transcendent function is the function of getting something that's unconscious up into consciousness, so that then you can integrate it into your life. Okay. I think what I'll read is one more paragraph, and see what we get out of that. So this paragraph is the beginning of a section entitled The Coming Eon. And here's what it says, one paragraph. The Coming Eon. Jung strikes a prophetic note in his Red Book. However, despite being certain that it is an important work of revelatory character, eventually to gain a broader audience for its visionary elements, he does not see himself as a prophet. Quote, "It will be no savior, no lawgiver, no master teacher unto you. I will be no savior, no lawgiver, no master teacher unto you. You are no longer little children." Upon review, Jung's first picture at the beginning of the chapter, The Way of What is to Come, does hint at his notion of thinking in astronomic and astrological terms. His narrative of the individuation process directly corresponds to the insight that the Christian age, the Piscean age, is coming to an end, and that mankind is standing at the doorstep of a new age, the Aquarian age. Humanity is experiencing birth pains since a new image of God is unfolding. Okay, so this is a new image of God, but in order to understand this, you need to see the first page of the Red Book. And so let me pull that up. So I do have that. Okay, here it is. All right. So this is going to be the first page of the Red Book. And you can see what Shandasani is talking about here. So on the first page of the Red Book, you have this giant D, and this is in the spirit of illuminated manuscripts. And so this entire, the Red Book, the so-called Red Book, is exactly like this, where Jung has done many images around letters like this one, and he's done many paintings also, but he's also written his story in German calligraphy in a very formal way. And he did that in order to make something that would last for 1,000 years, perhaps, or more. And so it becomes a kind of scripture. And so in this image around the D, we have symbolically exactly the whole central idea of Jungian psychology, which is, first of all, here's the astrological map, the planets going across with the sun at the set point of the end of the Piscean age and the beginning of the Aquarian age. And that's what his message, his astrological message, is here. Now, you may not believe in astrology, but I can assure you that it works, and I'll explain to you how it works. And what he's representing here is that we are coming up from the fishes, from these creatures under the sea, and we're gradually gaining more and more consciousness. And so we have the unconscious under the sea is represented by water always, and there's a fire aspect of what a passion aspect of what we are, and we're gradually working our way up like a snake. And this is why the caduceus, which is a symbol of medicine, has two snakes working their way up, because they are reaching more and more consciousness about how we can cure ourselves. But in this case, he shows the snake coming up to the point where it's wearing a crown, and that crown is humanity and human consciousness and awareness. And so here you can see a civilization living at the edge of the sea, at the edge of the unconscious. And you can see ships which are sailing on the sea and are in peril on the sea, but nonetheless, we do this, we all do this, because we all have this chaotic unconscious in our psyches that we have to learn to sail upon, and and we've learned to live in civilization, which is quite fragile, and we see that every time that there's a natural disaster, whether it's a hurricane, a tornado, a tsunami, or a coronavirus. We see just how fragile civilization is, and then we see Mother Nature and the Earth, our true mother, is also in this image. So this is quite a complex image that is expressing a lot of the basic aspects of Jungian psychology here. And it was done over 100 years ago by C.G. Jung. So the point is that we're coming to a time where we were little children. We were little children in the sense that we needed some direction, and all of the major religions have produced some direction. Okay, we all come out of chaos, where when we're born, it's extremely chaotic. We drop out of heaven, and immediately we're surrounded by lights and noises, and somebody's spanking our bottom, and we're crying and screaming. And, that's birth. That's how we come into the world, in chaos. And it takes us, traditionally 21 years to develop into a mature being. Unlike a bird, let's say, that is born from its egg, and within 4 weeks it has to fly, and within 8 weeks it has to be able to find its own food and to be a mature bird, basically, after 8 weeks. But human beings, we take varying degrees of time, at least until puberty, but longer and longer before we're fully aware and conscious of our world and what we have to think about it. It's a very complicated place today, where just 400 years ago, the amount of knowledge that a person gained in a lifetime, information that came into a person in a lifetime, was the equivalent of one edition of the New York Times today. So if you were to go pick up a copy of the New York Times today at your 7-Eleven, that would represent all the knowledge that the average person got in a lifetime, only 400 years ago. And so in China, people learned by a structure called the I Ching, and that the I Ching developed as a wisdom method to help people have a structure that they could point to. In India, in the Hindu world, we had the Bhagavad Gita, and later we had the teachings of the Buddha, Gautama, Siddhartha. And in the West, we had Christ. And the way Jungians see that is that Christ represents the suffering of humanity in the physical world. So he represents the end of a spectrum, or the end of a set of opposites that is the ego of the psyche, okay, opposites of the psyche. So Christ represents the ego and the material world, and the way we have to live our lives in the material world, which is to struggle with our calling and ultimately perhaps be broken by it. And on the opposite end of that spectrum is the Buddha, who represents the self, the deepest part of our unconscious being. And in effect, although the Buddhists eschew the idea of God, but in essence, this is the God image, the self, which is trying to gain consciousness and then push it away as illusion. And so it's materialism versus the opposite of materialism, which is nothing material. And so anyway, and so let me read a couple of these points again because they are relevant. So Jung strikes a prophetic tone in his Red Book. However, despite being certain that it is an important work of revelatory character eventually to gain a broader audience for its visionary elements, he does not see himself as a prophet. Now, revelatory means that Jung realized that the complexes in the unconscious, in the psyche, can manifest themselves as actual beings that we would recognize. And so in his case, he recognized Elijah and Salome and Philemon in his active imagination. In my case, I had a visitation by Mephistopheles, literally the devil in Faustus, in Goethe's Faustus. And I remember him as being that image of that being that I thought of at the time that I was studying Faustus 50 years ago. But, he was a real creature to me for a few seconds in my psyche. The night that my daughter told me that I was going to hell, I had this visitation by Mephistopheles, and it lasted maybe 5 or 10 seconds, but he appeared, and I made the Faustian bargain. I said, you can have my immortal soul on my death, provided none of my daughters think that of me for the rest of my life. And boom, he disappeared. And he hasn't been back. That incident occurred 21 years ago now. But also he's kept his bargain. And I haven't directly asked my daughter whether she thinks I'm going to hell still, but all evidence is suggesting not, perhaps. But we're all in a kind of hell, a psychological hell, and that's what we're talking about. And so what Dr. Jung is saying is that you are not going to have visions of Elijah and Salome, and I'm saying that you're not going to have a vision of Mephistopheles, but you may have a vision of some entity, and those are real. Those are the way our psyche presents to us our things that are going on in our psyche, so that we can interact with them. And that's what the Red Book is about and demonstrates. I had another experience like that lasted 8 months, not with Mephistopheles, but with a character for a novel that I wrote, who turned out to be the autobiography of my anima, but the main character was a young woman who became the first woman prime minister of Japan. And of course, there never has been a woman prime minister of Japan. So it was purely a psychological idea, but nonetheless, I wrote that novel and published it. And so anyway, he says, I will be no savior, no lawgiver, no master teacher unto you. You are no longer little children. So what he is saying is that his experiences are his, my experiences are mine. You have to get your own. And what we're doing is showing you some things that you might want to be aware of so that you know that this is actually happening to you. This sort of thing is actually happening to you. And, it's happening both in the physical world and the psychic world because, Donald Trump is actually a manifestation of our material world because he has bought in on the myth that the person who has the most toys at the end of their life wins. Well, that's not actually true, and he's the proof of that because he's gotten pretty much everything he ever wanted, leaving aside how he did get it. But he's gotten wealth, fame, the presidency of the United States, a trophy wife, all the toys that he could think of, including airplanes of his own and of the federal government, and people playing bands and so on. And he's not a happy man. I mean, if you look at this man, I don't think I have any pictures or I've ever seen a picture of him genuinely smiling or laughing. And so he's just the poster boy for what is wrong with the materialistic system. Because you can get everything in the material world and still not be happy. And so the point of the Tarot, for example, is in the Tarot, there are 4 suits. There's coins, which represents the material world. And so he's like the king of coins. If you know anything about the Tarot, he's gotten everything he wants. But he's very unbalanced. He's not happy. And so in order to be happy, you have to gain kingship, if you will. You have to internalize and experience all the kingships of the 4 suits. So the second suit is the suit of wands, which represents passion and fire and the hard-charging world of doing things. Then the suit of swords, which represents discernment and logic and being able to think things through. So we can say that Donald Trump has maybe reached the kingship, although on the negative side of the materialistic world, the coins. And, arguably he's working toward the kingship of passion, again on the negative side, because his passions are questionable. And so maybe he isn't really at that level yet of a transcendent kingship. Then in terms of thinking, the suit of swords, he's certainly a very logical man and a discerning man in terms of figuring out how he can get people's goats. But in order to be the king, you need to be able to keep your sword in your scabbard and not be at war all the time. And so maybe he hasn't integrated that part. And then the fourth suit, which is cups, which relates to emotion. And there we see that he's not a happy man. He doesn't have control of his emotions, or some would say, from a psychological point of view, that he doesn't have any. And that's a problem. So he's not whole in that sort of sense. So my teaching on the Tarot, which began 2 weeks ago, and you can see the first 2 sessions, I have already done the Empress and the Emperor. And tomorrow night I will be doing the Magician, which is card number 1 of the Tarot. The reason I started with the Empress is because of Robert Wang's suggestion that, without a mother or Mother Earth, there's nothing. And so we first need to understand that there has to be a mother. And then we have to understand that there needs to be a father. But then we go back and see further development, which comes from the Magician. And so that's the 3rd card in the Tarot, which I'll be teaching from tomorrow night at 8 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time on Monday. That'll be 8 in the morning for you, Nick. Bright and early. Okay, but go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, tomorrow.
Yeah,
tomorrow.
No, it'll be Tuesday morning for you, 8 a.m.
Yep, no problem.
Yep. Tuesday morning for you, 36 hours from now, something like that. Okay, so what he's saying is that now, in the fullness of time, after 400 years and after information has spread around the world, and we get lots more information than the Sunday New York Times. And since the opening of the internet, except for government and company secrets, we basically have everything in the world at our fingertips on the internet. And so we can get all the information of the world. Now, just think of the monumental nature of that. No wonder we're confused, because as beings, we developed and evolved naturally to this point 400 years ago, where we got 1 New York Times worth of information in a lifetime, and that was enough to keep us going and to live our lives. But after that period 400 years ago till now, all of a sudden information has gotten faster and faster and faster. And then boom, in 1995, the World Wide Web opened up, and social networking opened up, and iPhones and iPads and computers in everyone's hands. And all of a sudden, we all have all the information of the world, which is so much more. And so it's no surprise that we're confused. But what we have to learn to do is what we've always had to learn to do, which is okay, here's my ball of chaos. This is all the things I know that are happening in the world, and I have to put that chaos into one little ball, and then I have to be able to step away from it and integrate what it all means for my life. Okay. And that's why meditation is very useful. And it's one reason why the Tarot will be useful, or the Bhagavad Gita is useful, because or the Bible is useful, because they all provide a roadmap to understanding the way things work together. And so, spiritual texts provide us with a way of structuring this information, this huge mass of information that we have to deal with. It's a way of structuring that information. And so what the Tarot does is it tells you, and I'm not talking about divination and Tarot, that's a different topic, but what the Tarot does is it talks about 78 things that you have to face and deal with in your lifetime that would represent wholeness, and their opposites, because if you reverse the cards, now you have 156 people, things, in types of situations that you must deal with in your lifetime. And then you have to understand how these things interact together. And that's what the Kabbalah is showing, the 10 balls and the 22 pathways, which are pathways of energy. So, as I said at the beginning, like mother, that pathway is there in a young woman, and it's there in a young man as well, but only women actually have the experience of the pathway where the energy is running through that pathway. For men, we can never experience that, and so we never appreciate the meaning of that archetype from an experiential point of view. Young women, before they have a child, are in the same boat, but once they have a child, then they know what that energy is about. And once you're a mother, you're always a mother for life. I mean, with anomalous suggestions or anomalous situations, of course. And so, so what Jung is saying here is, if we first get that picture in our mind, then we can know where we are on this red ball of chaos. And in order to do that, we have to be able to hear ourselves think. And that means taking a time out of the day where you turn off the radio and just think about those things. Or actually, you don't have to turn off the radio, because if you have a roadmap, whether it's the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita or the Kabbalistic Tarot, then it gives you a way to step back from this chaos and say, okay, where am I in my life right now? Where am I, and what do I have to do? And so it's about finding what you have to do in your life. And Jung couldn't tell you about that, and I can't tell you about that. Each one of us has to step back from that ball of chaos and say, okay, what do I have to do now? And that's where this quote of Jung's, where he says, I called it the eternal moment, where, or he called it the eternal moment, where you have to make in every moment the best of the possibilities. It's as simple as that. In other words, we have to step back from this chaotic ball and say, okay, what are the possibilities that I am facing right now? Okay, each one of us has to do that. What are the possibilities that I have in my life? And then you have to select the best one for you. And there's no clear answer. You have to decide for yourself. And so this is why Jung says, I will be no savior, no lawgiver, no master teacher unto you. You are no longer little children. So each one of you and each one of us must mature to the level where we can be a fully functioning adult human being. That's the deal. And so, and so I guess that's it. So humanity is experiencing birth pains since a new image of God is unfolding. And so what this means is that for each of us, we must decide what it is that's our guiding star. What is it that directs our life and helps us see what it is that we can do based on each one of our situations. And that can change. It can change very dramatically over a lifetime. For me, it changed when I broke my leg. It changed when I lost my life savings. It changed when my daughter said I was going to hell, and boom, I dropped into hell at that moment. Not physically, but in my psyche, I was just knocked off my feet and had to find a new footing, a new way of experiencing that I could, make sense of myself, make sense of my daughter, and not lose my daughter. Okay, and that so easily can happen. And so I think I'll stop at that point. We've been going for a bit over 2 hours, and I do see that I have a large following for this session on YouTube. And I'm sorry I haven't been able, to get back, but Nick says, you look pricelessly happy, Skip. Yeah, I would say that is true. I mean, to the extent that you can be almost 74 years old and be happy, I can definitely say that, I've integrated all aspects of that. I've faced death many times in many different ways, and I'm okay with it, and I'm okay with what I've done with my life. But we have to have enough what I call seaworthiness. We have to keep our boat afloat in the sea of the unconscious, so that we can function. And I've found, thanks to Jung and 33 years of studying Jung, I found a way to do that for myself, and that's what I'm trying to share here. Okay, so there's a question, or there's a couple of comments. I'm going to pass on all the good to see you. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. So Mephistopheles Lord says, nice work, love your videos. I as well have had some trippy situations. My family thought me deranged, but after I found out the experience I had was similar to Jung's, I am now living the weirdest life. And, I would say the same thing. I wrote this, what I would have to call pornographic novel in 1993, which involved an entity, and it shook me to my bones, to my foundation. And I didn't publish it at that time in 1993. I put it in my drawer for 21 years. I finally published it only on Amazon Kindle in 2014. But for the YouTube audience, I will put into the chat the name of my novel and my pen name, which is Memoirs of a Woman by David Garrettson. And you need to, if you look that up on Amazon, you'll find it. It's only available in Kindle version, but thank you, Philippe. I appreciate your comment, particularly coming from you, sir. So that's a very meaningful comment to me. And Mephistopheles was going on about his weirdest life, although most interesting life. Well, Jung had a comment about being an introverted intuitive, which was, it's a very interesting life. and certainly I'm an introverted intuitive. So although you might not believe that from listening to this session today or any of my sessions, but actually I am a rather introverted individual, and I am highly intuitive. So it helps to understand that, everybody's life is weird. Okay, really, everybody's life is weird, and the issue that you want to learn, or what you want to learn, is that you have to make the best of the possibilities in every moment. We all are faced with different situations. I can't predict what yours will be. On the issue of being a prophet, what Jung fundamentally taught in his oeuvre was that prophecy is about understanding the past. If you understand the past, then you're going to understand what the future will be. And this is the issue of astrology as well, in both Western astrology and Chinese astrology. So what happened is human beings projected on the stars things that were actually happening in their own psyche. Okay, and so they weren't actual things happening because Mercury and Venus are doing these things in the physical world, but because human beings talked about it in that way for thousands of years, they evolved it and evolved it and evolved it in such a way that that's actually what does happen in the psyche. Okay, and so it's exactly like the Tarot and the archetypal images of the major arcana. What doesn't prove true falls away, but what does prove true persists. And this is true in any field of study, that the reason the Tarot is here, the reason that any sort of divination technique works, is because they work. They actually do work. And there's a reason that they work. But that reason isn't something that is necessarily acceptable to science. And so, because it can't be proven in the physical world. And the problem is that science gets to decide what science considers. And so, if you hold all variables constant and only solve for one variable, then you can get an answer in general based on one variable. But the human psyche doesn't work that way. The human psyche can vary any way it wishes, anytime it wishes. And so if you want to understand psychology, you can't hold other things constant and then solve for X. It's the variables are there and they're part of the game. And so the significance of the major arcana of the Tarot is that they represent the major archetypes that one experiences in the lifetime. And nobody can deny them. They're there. Okay, the I don't think there's anybody in the world that could deny the mother archetype and the power of that energy. And all of the archetypes are like that. The mother is, it seems to me, the most powerful, but I certainly have felt the warrior archetype in me and the energy through that. And I also see the dark side of it, which is what that self-portrait I did represents. So anyway, bye-bye. Well, nice to have you here today. And I hope to do it again next week if my voice holds up. And so anyway, I think I've responded to the YouTube comments, and I'm very gratified to have 19 people live on YouTube right now. That will mean that more than 100 people have checked in on this conversation over the period of time, and that's very gratifying to have an audience that's that large. And so I guess some of the things I've said are meaningful. So next week I will be beginning on page 30 of this essay. And by the way, on each week of this process, this is the 8th week, I have put links. I was given permission to read this essay and a number of other essays from this series, Jung's Red Book for Our Time. And so this essay, because it is so long, I did read into the YouTube channel. And so if you have access to YouTube, you can, in the video description of this session, you can find the 2 links that will take you to my reading of this essay. So if you'd like to hear it straight through with my reading it without all of this commentary, then you can do that just by clicking on those 2 links. And but there are many other essays from this series that I've also read from. And so I'd urge you to find the playlist called Jung's Red Book for Our Time, and you can listen to my reading of other essays. So I'm about out of voice, Nick, but do you have any closing comments? Since
no, not comment. Which 2 links were you talking about, Skip? Sorry.
In the descriptions of these now 8 sessions, you will find 2 links right under the base description. Okay.
Right.
On YouTube. So if you go, and that it won't be on this one for an hour because YouTube has to crunch the video down before they put it online. But and so I can't make the change yet. I will do an hour from now. But if you go back to any of the previous sessions, like go back to last week's, which is number 7, and you'll find they're highlighted with this cover as the thumbnail. Okay, so
got it.
So you can go to the home page of the YouTube channel and look for this cover as the thumbnail, and you can open any of those, and you will find these 2 links where I've read through this essay straight through without comments, so that and I think I've edited both of those readings, so they're actually fairly decent. And so you can hear the whole of Thomas Arzdt's article. What I'm trying to do is, particularly for the benefit of people who have English as a second language, I'm trying to go back and because this essay is really profound. There are many layers to it, and every sentence has layer upon layer upon layer to it in terms of Jungian psychology. And so what I'm trying to do is go back and talking through all of these different ideas and how they came up in Jungian psychology. So that's, that's why I could come back now. Like anybody, I'll just put this image up on the screen again. Anybody, when you're first confronted with the Red Book and you see what it is in German, and by the way, in the folio edition, in the reader's edition, you can get it in about 20 different languages without the images. But in the folio edition, you get first the 199 pages of Jung's illuminated text, which is in German calligraphy. But then after that, you get the full Red Book in, and I think it's available in many different languages also. There's a full discussion of it and a full translation of it so that you can understand what he was saying. You don't have to be able to read German calligraphy. But, the point is, when anyone is confronted by this image, at the beginning of the Red Book, you say, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, what's this about, man? and so what this series does is it's trying to look at the Red Book from many, many different angles. And now there's 70 essays in the series, and every one of them is exploring a different facet of the Red Book and of Dr. Jung's work, including we were to have today Ann Lee. And by the way, Ann Lee is not going to appear today because she's ill, and so she's agreed to reschedule at another time. So in terms of our Wisdom Path colloquia, we're scheduling them as regularly as we can. And last week, 2 weeks ago, we had Dr. Mary Stein speak, and that was a phenomenal session. If you haven't heard it, I urge you to go back and listen to that, and also Dr. Ann Ulanoff, her session. But Dr. Stein, because his book, Jung's Map of the Soul, an Introduction, was picked up by BTS, the K-pop boy band that's now so popular with more than 80 million followers around the world. So Dr. Stein's session was very heavily followed on this YouTube channel, and last time I checked it, it had over 7,100 hits in about 10 days. And so it was extremely popular, and there have been several others that have been very, very popular. And so there are at least two that are scheduled for next week. Those are Eva Ryder, who at 10 o'clock in the morning, Sunday morning, Singapore time, Nick, she's going to talk about the Kabbalistic Tarot. And that'll be very interesting because she's been teaching on it for many years. And then on next Sunday, a week from today, we're going to have Becca Tarnas, who has done quite a bit of research about the confluence of the Red Book and Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien's book. And she's talked about the confluence of the two books, which both appeared at about the same time, or both didn't appear, only Tolkien's appeared. Jung's didn't appear until a century later, but it turns out that they have very similar symbology and imagery. And so that's going to be a very, very interesting conversation with Becca Tarnas a week from today at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. So 10 a.m. in the Pacific, 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. in Hawaii, and it'll be 7 p.m. in Europe, and in Singapore, I'm sorry, Nick, it's going to be 1 a.m. I can't help that, but anyway, it's going to be an interesting conversation. So let me just see. So, okay. All right. So, Nick, I'll see you sometime soon, I hope. And maybe you can come on Tuesday morning if you're available.
Yep.
That would be great. 8 a.m. Tuesday morning, Singapore time. 8 p.m. Yeah. 8 p.m. Monday evening in the U.S. East. And 5 p.m. In the Pacific time zone. So peace. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Okay.